Okay, we're continuing with this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers, in alphabetical order. We're on Machiavelli. He was the Italian genius from the Renaissance who wrote about how the Medicis or someone else could take power in Italy and unify the country. So this is a typical problem in Christian countries. Christians tend to be very individualistic, and they tend to also be petty and jealous of each other, so they do not unify, and that makes them very weak. What I'm getting at is, look at Ireland. Ireland had a bunch of different chieftains. They couldn't unify adequately in order to stand up to the British, so they got their butts kicked, okay? Somewhat of a bit of a similar problem in Scotland. You know, they had loyalty to their local tribal chieftains, so to speak, and they were most of the time not able to unify. When they unified, they were very powerful, but they didn't unify as well as they might have, okay? And the same problem with Italy. Italy would have the different city-states not getting along, like Florence and Rome and Venice, for example, and that would prevent them from being able to stand up to outside invaders like the Spanish or like the French, okay, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, with the German Lutheran forces in 1527. So anyways, here's Machiavelli. He himself had risen to high power in Florence, but later on, he had pissed off the Medicis, and they imprisoned him for a while, tortured him for a while, then they let him go. And so he was essentially in exile. And, most of the great books are written by guys in exile or in prison. Boethius, the last of the great Roman scholars, wrote, Consolations of Philosophy when he was imprisoned. Cicero did a lot of his best writing when he was exiled to Greece. On and on. Voltaire wrote French letters, English letters when he was exiled to England, etc., etc. Locke wrote when he was exiled. So anyways, he would go into his library and he would just read and study. He really was brilliant. He had done tremendous, extensive study of the Roman historians, as well as thought quite a bit about the events during the time of his own day. Okay, so here he is, Niccolo Machiavelli. He lived from 1469 to 1527. He was a true Italian patriot. He thought that Christianity put too much emphasis on feminine virtues. He himself, was married with 4 kids. He was a little bit amoral, of course, a lot amoral. So here's a quote from Machiavelli. When the evening comes, I return to the house and go into my study. At the door, I take off my country clothes, all caked with mud, and put on a court outfit. Then I enter the world of ancient men. There I am received with loving kindness, and I feast on the food which alone is my true nourishment, which I was born for. I speak with the ancients and ask them the reasons for their actions, and they answer me. My ancient mentors, from these conversations I have composed an essay called The Prince. So then he wrote The Prince, which is sort of a summary of his political thoughts. He wrote longer books on political discourse and history. Okay, he had read, tons of history, including the discourses by Livy. He wrote a play called La Mandragola. Again, he just wanted Italy to unify. Okay, and this is Jacques Barzone commenting on Machiavelli from his book Dawn of Decadence. It's a good overall history book, very French. He said he wished Italy could unify to protect itself from outside countries, that a ruler needed to be both a fox and a lion. He felt the first prince to unify Italy would have to do much that was amoral, but once established with accepted authority would be able to be more moral. The prince is basically opportunism to the maximum. It's ruthless. Let's see here. Machiavelli also saw that some people could be very charismatic, like Savonarola, the religious preacher, the one who put forth the bonfire of the vanities, and he talked even Sandro Botticelli into burning some of his paintings, which was insane. Like Bishop Barron quote, when a movement starts destroying beautiful things, it's gone bad. But he also noticed that Savonarola could not really save Italy or make that big of a difference, nor could Jan Hus, because an unarmed prophet, basically, they can talk a lot, but in the end, they're kind of weak in terms of how much they can accomplish. So it is the way it is. Machiavelli had read the works of Aristotle and learned a lot from them. Boethius, by the way, the last great Roman who was imprisoned by the barbarians, translated the works of Aristotle from Greek into Latin. Machiavelli devoted himself in trying to answer the questions by studying why is it so difficult for a city to remain free? How could Italy save itself from being taken over by these other countries? He felt the best hobby for a man if he wanted to become a leader was to go hunting, because he felt that taught him many of the valuable skills, how to navigate, etc. Then he says, the first impression one gets of a ruler and of his brains is from seeing the men that he has about him. Yeah, a smart, confident person will like smart, confident people to work with them, versus a lightweight will surround himself by sycophants. Okay, Machiavelli, he says, the vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar. The great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities, and they are even more influenced by the things that seem than those that are. Yeah, that's how we are today. Some ruler just says, oh, I like you, I will help you, and then he does something terrible to them. They go, well, that was an accident. He didn't mean it. He didn't mean to poison your water with fluoride and aluminum. It was an accident. He means well. Yeah, right. Machiavelli, the most likely thing to succeed is that which the opponent believes you cannot attempt. To get a plan to succeed, it is helpful to keep it hidden until it is enacted. There is no surer sign of decay in a country than to see the rights of religion held in contempt. Yeah, when a country turns its back on religion, God turns his back on them, and they get crushed. That's been known since the Old Testament. Machiavelli, results are often obtained by impetuosity and daring, which could never be obtained by ordinary methods. It is better to win with deception than with force. It is prudent for men to abstain from threats and insults toward anyone, for this does not weaken them, but it makes them more angry at you. A government that does not allow its citizens to be armed is not itself to be trusted. Always assume incompetence before looking for conspiracy. Above all else, be armed. The unarmed man is not just defenseless, he is also contemptible. The state is merely a vehicle for the men in power. The ability and perseverance are the weapons of weakness. If a nation loses its martial virtues, it is doomed. Yeah, and I remember hearing somebody else say a state is basically, a group of men who loot a country. But anyways, back to Machiavelli. He said, it is prudent for men to abstain from threats and insults because all they do is piss people off and they don't weaken your opponent. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Therefore, one must be a fox to recognize the traps, and a lion to frighten the wolves. Power is the pivot on which everything hinges. He who has power is always right, and the weak are always wrong. And that's true. Basically, Nietzsche has said the same thing. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's a question of power structures. It's like the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule, because they can pay more people to support them. So basically, they'll pay a bunch of people to support them, and therefore their opinion becomes majority opinion, so to speak, and it becomes enforced, regardless of what anyone else can say. All right, Machiavelli, there are 3 types of brains. One understands on its own, another can be taught to understand, and a third can neither understand on its own nor be taught. The first is excellent, the second commendable, the third is useless. The Romans knew how to divide and conquer. Divide et impera. Okay, it is far safer to be feared than to be loved. Among other things, being disarmed and weak makes you despised. Hatred is gained as much by good works as by evil. When neither their property nor their honor is touched, the majority of men live content. Okay, because men more easily forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. Men are more ready to offend one who desires to be loved than one who desires to be feared. There is no better indication of a man's character than the company he keeps. Men rise from one ambition to another. First they seek to secure themselves against attack, then they attack others. There is no way of guarding against flattery than by letting men understand that they will not offend you by speaking the truth. But when everyone can tell you the truth, you lose their respect. A prudent prince must take a third course, by choosing for his counsel wise men, and giving these alone full liberty to speak the truth to him, but only of those things that he asks, and nothing else. But he must ask them about everything, and hear their opinion, and afterwards deliberate by himself in his own way. It is an infallible rule that a prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised. The state is force. The state is a machine for the oppression of one class by another. And here's a quote by Bertrand Russell. The principal source of harm done by the state is the fact that power is its chief end. The prudent path should always be to follow in the path of great men and to imitate them, so that he will attain their greatness, or at least some tinge of it. All armed prophets have succeeded. All unarmed prophets have failed. Yeah, Jan Hus and Savonarola both got burned at the stake. Okay, Machiavelli continues, whoever wishes to foresee their future must consult the past, for human events ever resemble those of preceding times. This arises from the fact that they are produced by men who have been and ever will be animated by the same passions, and thus by necessarily have the same results. He who desires or attempts to reform and wishes to have it accepted and capable of maintaining itself to the satisfaction of everybody must at least retain the semblance of the old forms, so it may seem to the people that there has been no change in the institutions, even though in fact they are entirely different from the old ones. Okay, so that's Machiavelli. I hope you found that helpful.